We've come to the birthplace of Aristotle, the Greek coastal town of Stagira. He lived here until he was 14 or so, and given his later interest in biology, we can assume that he occasionally went tide pooling. Most likely he spent time at this very spot, looking at critters in the water. Critters like this one. I said we would talk about what the world is like and the related question of how we can know what the world is like. Aristotle's answers to those questions are no longer widely accepted, but if we understand how Aristotle saw the world, we'll begin to get a sense of what was lost when we decided he was wrong. To understand Aristotle's view of the world, let's consider one tiny part of it. Take a look at this starfish. What's it made of? Well, physical stuff, obviously. Starfish flesh. Anything else? Consider the following scenario. Suppose this starfish gets eaten. I don't know what kind of starfish-eating creatures they've got around here. Maybe some sort of eel. The starfish is chewed on a bit, maybe, but then quickly swallowed. Poor thing may still be alive at that point, but it will soon die and be digested. At that point, here's the key question. Will the starfish still exist? Well, surely not. If we had the starfish and the eel in a tank together, and after the starfish was eaten and digested, I asked you to check the tank and tell me how many starfish are in there, you'd come back with none. There used to be a starfish in there, but it's gone. Right? Here's a puzzle, though. The stuff the starfish was made of, the flesh, the molecules, hasn't vanished at all. A lot of it ended up being incorporated into the eel's tissues. And the rest of it, well, the rest got excreted, but the eel poop is still floating around. So the stuff the starfish was made of is still there, but the starfish isn't. Now, isn't that proof that there's more to the starfish than just physical stuff? The molecules are still here, but the starfish is gone. Therefore, there must be more to the starfish than just molecules. Aristotle would say that what's gone missing is the starfish's soul. Oh, gee, you're thinking, that's clever. If we kick over a stack of rocks, the rocks are still there, but the stack is gone. Does that mean the stack has a soul too? That's a fair question. Aristotle's answer would be that a stack of rocks is really just a tall, skinny heap. It's not an organized, unitary, self-maintaining thing. A starfish, by contrast, has a high degree of, you might say, structural integrity. So much so, in fact, that if you chop off an arm, the starfish will grow a new one. Starfish are famous for being able to do that. So what? You may reply, so what? It's just still a fancy, self-maintaining collection of molecules. I don't intend to argue the point. I just want you to understand that Aristotle saw things differently. According to him, the starfish has two fundamental components: the physical stuff, the matter of which it's made, and the soul, which makes it into a living thing and makes it a thing of a particular kind, namely a starfish rather than a lobster or a kangaroo. If you still think this all sounds kind of dumb, well, you've got company. Geographically, not very far away, in fact. Across the water, just past that island on the horizon, is the town of Abdera, the birthplace of another philosopher named Democritus. He died right around the time Aristotle left Stagira. Later, when Aristotle was teaching philosophy in Athens, he talked about Democritus and took the trouble to offer arguments for why Democritus was wrong. Democritus, you see, was an atomist. He believed, along with just a few others of that day, that a starfish and everything else in the world consisted of physical stuff, and that's all. There is more to be said about the differences between Aristotle and Democritus, and we'll get to that. In the meantime, though, I'll offer you a paradox. Aristotle absolutely carried the day against Democritus and established such a reputation that even today, Aristotle is a giant in the history of philosophy. Democritus, by contrast, is a bit player. Why the difference? Well, for one thing, few of Democritus's works survived for later generations to read, but I think there's another very ironic reason why Aristotle is so much more famous than Democritus. Aristotle was basically wrong. He mapped out a way of seeing the world which was very influential, but in the end it didn't pan out. In other words, nobody, with the possible exception of Thomas Aquinas, whom we'll get to in a little while, nobody made a whole lot of progress beyond what Aristotle had done. Democritus, by contrast, was on the right track. Or at least that's the modern consensus, which meant that when people took a fresh start with the atomist agenda almost 2,000 years later, they quickly advanced beyond what Democritus had come up with. The basic gist of his ideas was so immediately clear, and the fruits of that line of inquiry came so quickly, that there was never much reason for people to sit around scratching their heads trying to figure out what Democritus meant. And no reason to sit around being impressed with what he'd accomplished. In short, one reason Democritus fell into obscurity is that he was right. We need to talk more about Aristotle, but let's do that on the road. Before we leave, take just one more look across the water, this time to the south. Remember how I said that the eastern half of the Roman Empire preserved the works of Aristotle when they were lost in the west? That empire has vanished almost completely. Almost. But not quite. Ranged around the slopes of that mountain on the horizon, named Mount Athos, is a collection of Christian monasteries which has been under continuous self-governing administration ever since it was founded with the blessing of the Byzantine Emperor 500 years ago. Now it is geographically part of the nation of Greece, and militarily under the protection of the Greek government, but administratively it is self-run, the same as since its beginning. One small remnant of the Byzantine Empire is preserved and protected here on this peninsula. Aristotle's native land, you might say, is repaying a debt.